Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you, as always, to avail yourselves of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features, as well as our website, gsmcpodcast.net, to better contribute and interact with the shows around the network as you wish. I love hearing all your guys' opinions on certain sports. I learn from you guys as well, and thank you very much for everything you do for the network, whether it's leave a comment or even a tip or donation if you feel so inclined. It's genuinely appreciated by all concerned around the network, not just me and my show, but others as well, doing great things in their own right, and it just makes them that much better. So thank you for all you do. Without further ado, let us jump right into our second segment of today's show, talking about the teams with the top odds to win the 2025 to 2026 MLB World Series. And a lot of the teams that came up in the previous segment are going to be the favorites. And they're going to be monitored not just through spring training, but throughout the regular season, throughout the playoffs, and so on and so forth. But it's how all these teams handle that pressure that I think is going to be an even bigger storyline than people realize, because every single one of them here has the talent and the potential to make it all the way. But they're in large media markets, or some of them are in smaller ones, but just have this immense pressure to contend because of potential windows opening. So it's a very interesting MLB landscape, not just amongst these teams, potential contenders on the outside looking in terms of potentially winning. So without further ado, let's talk about the top teams and maybe some dark horses that could emerge potentially for my bettors out there. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it, starting off with the betting favorite right now, the Los Angeles Dodgers at plus 300. And there's no reason as to why anyone should really question it. It's because they have the deepest roster in all of Major League Baseball. They signed Roki Sasaki to add to that already deadly pitching rotation. They signed Blake Snell as well, and people forget about that. They added so much depth, not just in the infield, but the outfield as well, with both Ha-Seong Kim and Michael Conforto. Oh yeah. And they re-signed Tommy Edman and retained Kike Hernandez, two postseason heroes last year. And oh yeah, Freddie Freeman's going to be healthier. Mookie Betts is still there. Clayton Kershaw could return to this rotation. Tyler Glasnow could return to this rotation more healthily. And most importantly, Shohei Ohtani's now going to be a two-way player after recovering from Tommy John surgery last year. It's ridiculous how talented this Dodgers team is, and it's quite unfair if you really think about it. But that's just the beauty of how teams can construct their roster. Kudos to GM Andrew Friedman doing this job by bringing together all these talented players, because it's truly remarkable to behold in how this team could potentially have a stranglehold on the MLB for the next 5 to 10 years, potentially, if all of these players stay healthy, extend their contracts, most importantly, potentially develop a sneakily, shockingly good farm system as well. So the Dodgers could be amongst the ranks to be betting favorites for the next couple of World Series, and not just for this one, as the defending champions. But my question about them is, they're in LA, and they're now going to be healthier than ever. And that media circus surrounding this team is going to grow. And injury concerns as a result could grow as well. So, if one or more players who are important to the success of this team potentially get injured, don't play well, there are going to be questions asked about it. It's how they rise above it, because there's not really been a repeat champion in the last 2 decades, not since the 98 to 2000 Yankees. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the week. I think that this Dodgers team is well equipped to be the first, but they have to answer a lot of questions both on the field and off it as well. Then let's talk about the New York Yankees, the second betting favorite here at plus 800. We talked about how they might have improved defensively, at the very least, by adding Paul Goldschmidt and Cody Bellinger, still elite defensive players. But you're losing a lot of power and pop in that lineup. And now you're relying on more secondary pieces in Jazz Chisholm, Anthony Volpe, and Austin Wells to hit for you. So I think that switch up in the lineup could spell more low-scoring games for this Yankees team. But I do think when you look at this roster on paper, it's very good now defensively. I think that you've covered up a lot of areas of need by signing both Goldschmidt and Bellinger. It balances out both the infield and outfield. And you also made fans happy in terms of finally bringing in a left-handed pitcher to balance out a very righty-heavy rotation. But it's all up to these quote-unquote role players. I wouldn't exactly call them role players because they're still important pieces in this lineup, but you get the picture because of who was there last year. So Jazz Chisholm, Anthony Volpe, Austin Wells. On the pitching side of things, Luis Gil needs to step up his game a lot as well to truly bolster that rotation. And I feel like this Yankees team, yes, they lost Soto. But I think that they made very smart additions. As Deathless Sadie says, do you talk about sports other than MLB? We'll get to those in a little bit, my friend. But for now, we're sticking in the MLB range and talking some Yankees baseball here. But I do appreciate that comment because, don't worry, we'll get to other sport yet, my friend. But talking about the New York Yankees, I feel like all the questions surrounding them are going to come from the media and it come from the post-Juan Soto era just because of the polarizing player he was in the clubhouse. So I feel like in a weird way, the Yankees might be better off without him, but they still have to prove it, and the younger players in this lineup have to prove it as well. Then let's talk about the team that now has Mr. Juan Soto, the New York Mets. And I feel like the New York Mets are not just going to be about Soto this year. They're going to be about the plan they believe they have in terms of making these high-profile signings, but also growing these younger players like a Mark Vientos, like a Francisco Alvarez, potentially maybe like a Brett Beatty if he can finally establish himself as a nice piece in this roster. But I do feel like the Mets' biggest questions are how they overcome the addition of Juan Soto. How Juan Soto transitions from the Yankees clubhouse to the Mets clubhouse, which has a more positive culture attached to it that they developed last year. And if it gets disrupted, how the team performs. Because remember, this team got off to a terrible start at the beginning of last year, but then they grew into the season. And Juan Soto now entering that landscape could spell danger for their start yet again. But I'm willing to believe that the power in this Mets lineup can compensate for any external issues that potentially arise. And that's why I'm banking on them as potentially the best threat in the NL to make the World Series outside of the Dodgers at plus 850. But now let's talk about the depth of the NL East specifically, because it's not just the Mets. They're going to have a media circus surrounding them, a lot of questions surrounding them, a lot of stars in their lineup. The Atlanta Braves are there as well, and they may not even be the second best team in the NL East. In fact, I don't even know if there is a best team in the NL East. That's how even I believe the Mets, Braves, and Phillies are. The Braves are here because of the rejuvenation of bringing back a player like Ronald Acuna Jr., in my opinion. That adds depth to your outfield. They already have, perhaps in my opinion, one of the best offensive and defensive infields you potentially have. Both Austin Riley and Matt Olson aren't power guys, but they get the job done. This is one of the best hitting lineups in all of MLB because you have the power of a Ronald Acuna Jr., but you have guys that just are instinctual hitters at the plate like Olsen and Riley. And so that just makes them a tough team. And don't forget about the ascension of guys like Harris and guys like Arcia who bring that experience to this lineup. And then you look at the pitching rotation. Yeah, they lost Freese, but Strider's on the come up. They still have a ton of guys in that rotation who can get the job done. And Andre says, who's my MLB team, bro? Hopefully we'll get to them by the end of this segment because they're not on this odds list. But They could potentially be a dark horse this year, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But the Atlanta Braves certainly are another NL East team outside of the Mets and potentially even the Phillies to potentially challenge the Dodgers in the NL hierarchy. Then the last but not least, these guys, the Orioles, I feel like are the first quote-unquote dark horse, even though a lot of people have been hyping them up over the past couple of years. And who wouldn't? This is an incredible MLB team built through their farm system and their youth. These youthful players finally getting out onto the field and making themselves known. I love Adley Rutschman. I love Gunnar Henderson. I love Heston Kjerstad. At 1777, Memorabilia, Larry Sports says, who you got winning the AL? Potentially maybe the Orioles, but right now, if you were to put me on the spot, I would have to say the Yankees just because I feel like defense to them was a little bit more important than trying to retain Juan Soto, even though it's going to lead to a couple more disappointing games. But I do like the addition. Every year people say Orioles, they choke in the playoffs. I get that, which is why, and what brings me to the dark horses in the AL, and what brings me to my favorite team, my man Andre, the Texas Rangers. I feel like the Yankees are in a division in the AL East that could be very tough to determine. The AL Central, you got some weird teams in there. The Guardians, the Tigers, the Royals. All these teams that could potentially be, elite MLB teams, but not necessarily appealing MLB teams. Then you look to the AL West. That's where madness can ensue. That's where the Houston Astros look weaker than they have in years past. They lose Alex Bregman, they lose Ryan Presley, and now the Texas Rangers and potentially even the Seattle Mariners could emerge here. If Texas remains healthy, if Jacob deGrom gets a prolonged period of time pitching in this team, and Josh Young, Evan Carter, Adolis Garcia, Wyatt Langford all have bounce back years, this Texas team could potentially be a dark horse candidate. And Bochy's one of those guys who's like every other year can make magic happen. So who knows? These are right now the betting favorites. I don't necessarily agree myself, but we know what you continue to think about the betting favorites to win the World Series this year. But coming up next, we transition to the world of college basketball, analyzing the top 5 in that particular poll after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC